Still so heated about this terminology thing of closely related and distant keys, and the only reasons why I can think that you're so emotionally invested in this and accusing me of saying that the only theory that there is classical functional harmony, even though my whole platform is about saying that there are many different theories of music because we all think about music differently, is that you have some prescribed quality assigned to closely related keys versus parallel key relationships, which isn't what anyone has been saying ever. And you seem to think that this terminology all refers to one parameter of relationships between keys, and it's not. So let's dig into the terminology a little more. There are a few different ways we describe relationships, which are the parameters between keys. There's similarity, which refers to like all major keys. They're similar because they all have the same interval patterns, even though they're different keys. There's distance relationships, which would be your closely related versus distantly related, and harmonicism, so F sharp major and G flat major sound the same, look different, and then lookalikes, which would be your relative majors, minors, and modes, which all share the same key signature, and pitch collection, they just have different tonal centers. All different types of relationships that don't relate to each other. Now, remember that music theory is a bunch of massive metaphors, so the terminology closely and distantly related has to do with proximity in physical space, not similarity or likeness or most common usage. This means that the theorists who started using this terminology were thinking and mapping key relationships to each other based on some kind of physical space. So here's another metaphor. Think about keys based on the number of accidentals in them, and specifically the one accidental that makes it different from any other key. So for sharp keys, that's going to be your leading tone. G major has F sharp and only F sharp. D major's got C sharp as a leading tone, and so on and so forth. And then for flat keys, it's going to be your subdominant. So B flat for the key of F, E flat for the key of B flat major. So we can think in a non-nuanced way that that single accidental is what makes that key unique and different from the other keys. Now imagine that we're building a Subway sandwich of keys. When you go to Subway, you have to start with bread of some kind because it wouldn't be a sandwich otherwise, and then you add bread, meat, and cheese, and then other toppings to it, and they're laid out in that order based on category. You start with meat, then you add cheese, so there's a specific order to putting toppings onto the sandwich. Same thing with accidentals. There's a specific order to sharps and flats when we write them in key signatures. So they go B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, etc. For sharps, they're F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, etc. Going back to our Subway sandwich metaphor, you can think of the categories of sandwich toppings as accidentals that must go on the sandwich. So meat could be the first sharp or flat, then the cheese is the second, and then as you go on down the line and add more toppings, you can create more and more keys based on the number of toppings that are on it. So C major would be just bread. And then G major, let's just stick with sharp keys, is going to be bread plus a meat. A major is going to be bread, meat, cheese, and lettuce because it's got 3 sharps in it. E major has 4 sharps in it, so it's going to be bread plus meat, cheese, lettuce, and let's say tomato. 4 accidentals. And building the sandwich has to walk down that sandwich building assembly line physically farther in order to get from where they pick up the bread to where they pick up the tomatoes. So we can associate each key sandwich we're building with the physical location of the topping that is its unique accidental. So C major is the bread cabinet, G major is the meat section, D major is the cheese, A major is where the lettuce is, E major is where the tomatoes are. So to get from the bread cabinet, C major, to the meat section, which we've assigned as G major, is you just lean over, it's right there. They're very close together in physical space. But getting from the bread cabinet, so C major, to the tomatoes, which we said was E major, is going to be a few steps. It is physically farther away from the bread cabinet than the meat is. So that's what we're referring to when we're talking about this physical distance of relationships between keys. Another metaphor or image that you can use to get a sense of the physical distance between keys is just the circle of fifths. C major on the circle of fifths is physically pretty far away from G flat major, but it's directly beside G major. So if you even wanted to, you could measure like in centimeters the specific circumference between 2 keys on the circle of fifths and say this is closer than this one. Well, let's talk about parallel relationships, and this I'm including modal mixture, chord borrowings, chord alterations, all of those. They don't fit into this metaphor because their relationship isn't measuring a parameter of distance, it's measuring a parameter parameter of flavor. So the word parallel in just normal English means either two things that are side by side without physical distance changing between them. They always have the same distance, or easy to compare. And I think that definition's a little easier. So parallel keys, E major and E minor, are easy to compare because they have the same starting and ending point. They use the same alphabet letters in the same order. So it's easier to see where they're different and where they're the same because you can just put them right next to each other super easily. Easy to compare, they're parallel. So now, keeping with our imaginary subway, we're actually no longer thinking about keys in terms of physical distance on the assembly line from their unique toppings. Our sandwiches are already built, we're eating lunch with our friends. So say that you and your friend both got sandwiches that have the same kind of bread, Italian herbs and spices, and the same kind of meat, let's go with turkey. But maybe you got provolone and your friend got cheddar instead. They are different flavors, but you could totally swap out cheeses or even let your friend give you some cheddar to add to your provolone. And then maybe you say you got lettuce, but your friend got onions, and that's another thing that y'all can trade out and it would taste good. So parallel relationships aren't about physical distance, it's about the flavor. And so since major keys usually borrow from minor keys the most, that's the most common borrowing. Say that you got a major key sandwich and your friend got a minor key sandwich, and so that means they were just more adventurous with getting extra toppings than you were. So that means that you can borrow more of their toppings because you don't have as many toppings to share with them, and you can use them to spice up your sandwich. None of that has to do with the physical distance of the location of the toppings. It's all about flavor, and it's a different type of metaphor altogether, so it doesn't make sense to even think about parallel relationships in terms of distance because that kind of relationship is about flavor profile, not inches or feet. In some music genres, parallel relationships are used way more than distance relationships. Does that mean that one kind of relationship is better, more important, more refined, or polished than the other? Absolutely not. It's just a pattern. It's a pattern of like this genre just tends to use this type of key relationship more than this type of key relationship. It's not a matter of quality. Music theorists don't talk about quality. Music theorists are just observers. When we're talking about modulations or key changes, the measure of distance is about abruptness. So in order to get from the first key to a distantly related key, it's a figurative perceptual long jump from the first key to the distantly related key. But these can actually be the most fun because it's trickier to make it not sound like a mistake. And it's just much more complicated. So maybe it's even cooler when you use distantly related keys. To adjust a little bit about Jazz from the commenter, Jazz is very aware of these types of relationships and uses both types of relationships a lot. One relationship isn't better than the other, and jazzers do use the same terminology. I'm not a jazz expert by any means, but I have been in a jazz ensemble for many years, so I do understand at least a little bit about jazz. And I'm definitely not a classical music elitist, so yeah. All that to say, parallel relationships aren't a type of distance relationship, so it doesn't make sense to try to describe them that way. It's like trying to say that 15 feet is close to the level of spiciness that a sandwich has. It's not comparable at all. They're different parameters. So ask questions in the comments and remember to stay kind and curious to others in the comments. I am doing my best to make this on social media a community where people don't get bullied for being curious.